Well, welcome back. In an age characterised by chronic mismanagement at a local government level, one might expect a little contrition from local authorities, perhaps in the form of reduced salaries to council chief executives or more transparency in the way money is spent. Yet, extraordinary though it may seem, councils still persist in paying bloated salaries to unelected officials. Over 3,000 council workers earned six figures, a vastly wasteful exercise, but Hampshire Council stands on the podium. Even though it's warned that it faces bankruptcy, it has a Director of Culture, Community and Business Services who was paid a total of £651,158 in 1 year, nearly 5 times more than the Prime Minister. So how do they find the cash to sustain these handouts? Well, from you, of course. Council tax continues to rise as local leaders seek to raise money from the people with all the zeal of King John. For the first time, some households are having to pay over £5,000 a year, which would have been a fifth of the total exchequer revenue under the not-lamented King John. As councils reach breaking point, perhaps we need a modern-day Magna Carta to keep in check such arbitrary practices. Well, I'm joined now by Elliot Keck, the head of campaigns at the Taxpayers Alliance, the think tank behind these revelations. Thank you for coming in. Every year this gives you a fantastic report to point out the extravagance of councils which are going bankrupt. How do they justify it?
Well, you picked up on a few things which is really interesting. Firstly, we haven't had the Magna Carta mentioned today in the context of the Town Hall Riches, and there's a couple of other things you mentioned. Firstly, the increase in the number of people on high salaries and high remuneration packages, despite the fact that we've seen inflation-busting council tax hikes, and also the importance of transparency. And actually, this year we've actually reached a sad milestone where, for the first time, over 50 councils have failed to publish their accounts, 59 councils in total, and that's really, really troubling. That means, you know, almost about a sixth of councils have failed to publish the key document that shows taxpayers and residents how they're spending their money and what they're spending it.
So does that mean there may be more than the 3,000? Because with these documents you'd find
absolutely.
Other people similarly paid.
Absolutely. So given there's an average of 9 people per council that we've actually looked at, that we've been able to look at, if you extrapolate that across the rest of the councils, you're probably talking about somewhere in the region of 3,600, which would make it comfortably the record. As it is, it's only the highest since 2015. But in 2015, we didn't have this problem. Most councils publish their accounts on time. But
if you want effective people, don't you have to pay the going rate? And if councils are competing with the private sector, somebody who could earn 150,000 in the private sector would want to earn 150,000 working for a council.
I think it's a very fair point. And listen, where councils have bosses that are providing services at good value for money without increasing council tax or without increasing council tax any more than is necessary, I think they have a good case for that pay packet. I think we need to remember that when we're talking about working in the public sector, it's much more than just the pay, which is already higher than in the private sector. In the public sector, you have access to a pension scheme, normally defined benefit pension scheme, that is unavailable to almost everybody in the private sector.
And that seems to be where the really high figures come from.
Absolutely.
The figure I quoted was from somebody who left the service of Hampshire Council, got a year's salary, a year's payoff, and then £400,000 in pension.
Yes, which is absolutely extraordinary, and that's why we campaign for a cap on these exit payments. And it's a reason why the public sector pension bill is now at about £2.6 trillion. These are pensions, you know, people are not paying into them. They're not going into a defined pot, which then grows and then pays out over time. Essentially what happens is you join the council, you get put on this defined benefit scheme. When you retire, you get given this guaranteed pension of often around 70-75% of your final earnings. It's absolutely extraordinary, and I think that's one area where government can actually take some action.
And if we were to do something about these very high payouts, it's actually at the pension level we need to be looking, because frankly, for senior people in senior jobs, as Jeremy Hunt said recently, £100,000 is effectively the going rate.
Yes.
But in the private sector, nobody is getting £400,000 put into their pension.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think we should belittle councils or pretend that they're not important. All of your viewers will know exactly how important their local council is. They provide social care, they provide education, roads, potholes, really important.
They provide potholes.
Exactly.
I don't think you meant to say that, but I think they
potholes.
Yes, well, I think they mainly provide them.
Yeah, and so they do. They carry enormous responsibilities. They often deal with very large budgets. These are often very important roles, but they have access to a level of additional benefits that are unheard of in the private sector.
And some of them are very good. When I was selected as the candidate for North East Somerset, there was a man in Baines who was paid £300,000, but he'd saved taxpayers £18 million in 1 year. And you think that's worth it when you can see that they're actually making contribution, but that it's this vast swathe of pensions that are a long-term liability for the country that we just can't afford and needs to be reformed.
And an unfunded liability, critically. And again, to go back to the previous point, you know, we want good people in councils, we want good people delivering good services, but most people in the country feel their council hasn't been performing up to standards recently.
Though some councils are funded, it's one of the bits of the public sector where there are payments into funds.
Yes, it's better than areas such as the NHS and the civil service, but it's still a level of generosity that is not found almost anywhere in the private sector.
And we must have a discussion at some point on the discount rates used to fund pensions, which is almost certainly wrong, and that we're either heavily overfunded or heavily underfunded where they're funded, but that the pay-as-you-go ones are the biggest burden to the taxpayer.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's how you reach these absolutely enormous figures of the 3,106 when you're looking at actually you're breaking it down by the remuneration package. The salary is a reasonable chunk, but for the most egregious cases, the 650,000, you're looking primarily at pensions are the big drivers.
Well, thank you very much, Elliot.